compelling conversations with people really all over the world who see this as an opportunity to infuse, implement, learn from the work that we've been doing. So it's an exciting time for us, and we've spent so much time with learners, with employers actually designing these credentials, that we need to embark on the next phase of work now that has essentially revealed itself along the way. In my role, I've been at the lab for 3+ years. I direct this work. Tara's been with us about a year now, former instructional designer, and I need to put like $1 in the jar every time I say former, because you're always still an instructional designer, but brings that expertise to our work, really, in bringing the toolkit to life and thinking about ways in which we could make the toolkit even more dynamic as we go along. So TeeUp really is spawned from our work during a lot of our design work in designing the badge. And I want to talk a little bit about the notion of the T, and then we'll get into the questions. So if you're not familiar with the concept of the T-shaped learner, it really is, that's where our thinking came from. And the T essentially is the top of the T. The horizontal would be what we would consider to be the space where 21st century skills would reside. So our skills, but also other skills also that are sort of under the same umbrella. And then the stem of the T, or the vertical, would be the quote-unquote technical skills needed for a particular role. So what we have found is by using this just framework and visual, it served as a common landing ground for both supply and demand side. So for learners to see how their own skills line up in a T, I could take my resume and maybe design it in the form of a T instead, or how an employer can actually turn a job description into something that is, again, more 21st century skills facing. And here's an example of one for a schools architect. So you can see at the bottom, you've got maybe some entry-level skills, technical skills needed, but then across the top, what you can see are 8 blocks. Those are all of the digital badges, the skills that we've badged for. They're sub-competencies beneath each of those skills, and 2 that are shaded, initiative and collaboration. When you ask somebody, well, what are the 2 most important of these skills, or the most important skills for this particular position, those are the ones that were shaded in. So that really opened our eyes to this notion of, well, maybe that should be central to this next part of the work, which is really getting employers and schools, organizations on the same page, and using this T profile really as a jumping off point. So that's really the crux of the work, and we're asking employers to really commit to this, to come to the table, because essentially we're trying to sweeten the deal for them to build a pipeline that of learners who have these skills and the skills that they're actually looking for. So we're really excited about it. We've been doing some of this work already just on our own, but now we want to make it official with this cohort. And we're looking for partners who are excited about this as we are. So let's talk a little bit about it. We pulled out some questions, and then we'll open it up, to see if there's anybody who has questions. I would encourage folks in the interim, you could use the chat. So if there are questions that are coming up, you can feel free to type in your questions, and we'll make sure we get to these, to your questions before the end of the time. But we pulled out questions that have been coming our way, either as part of the application process, or in emails to us, or in person at a conference. So we're going to walk through some of those now. So first, when is the application deadline? If you've actually looked at the application itself, what you'll notice is that there is no deadline on the application. And that was because we were initially really wanted to leave it open. What we've been doing is reviewing applications on a rolling basis, but we are trying to launch, and really do want to launch this fall with our partners. So we're going to close the application deadline on September 14th. So for anybody who actually maybe has submitted an application already, there's a good chance, if you're a strong candidate, that you'll hear from us before the 14th as we try and round out the cohort. of schools. What we're really saying is sooner the better. So get your application in as soon as possible. We know it's going to take a little bit of offline work. So most people who look at it can't unilaterally say, yes, we're going to do this, but they probably need to talk to some other people, talk to their employer, and then say, yes, we've got the commitment and we're going to do this application.
So we are kicking off this cohort this fall with the employer partner. We'll have a design session with them to decide which badge your institution will be offering. And then we're hoping for a springtime launch. So in the spring semester, students will actually be earning the badges, and then just in time for those seniors to be searching for a job. So then tracking their employment outcomes, and following up with the employers this spring. But we're also flexible and willing to work with you, so if this timeline that we've proposed doesn't work for you, still apply, and we can be flexible and move stuff around to make stuff work for you as well. Another question that we get a lot, not even necessarily in regard to the TeeUp TheSkills campaign, but in general in the digital badging space, is how do we get employers on board, or how do we show to the employers that we're interested in working with? A lot of times the institutions keep their employers really close to them. They don't want to, you know, muddy the waters, and those are really prized relationships. So the lab has worked hard to minimize this lift from the employers. So we have in the fall just a half-day session that we ask the employers to join us for, where they'll be filling out those key profiles to help us decide which skills we should be focusing on. And then we're asking them to just take a first look. You don't have to agree to hire these candidates or anything, but just take a look at their application along with the badges, so that we have something to, so that we have data at the end of this to actually see, did this work? Was it influential in the interview process? Was it influential even, you know, 3 or 4 months into the job? Was the student more aware or a heightened sense of these skills? So those are the main asks for the employers. But beyond that, if you have someone that's really enthusiastic and interested in badging or 21st century skills, there are lots of other touch points that we can get them involved, just to build stronger collaboration between your institution and the employer partner as
well. So some people ask us about this notion of the data that we're looking to collect. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is a really important piece of work, not just for us, but really we feel for the world of micro-credentialing and badging, as the questions, the chicken and egg scenario around are employers using badges? Should I, as a school, use badging as a strategy if employers aren't asking for them, right? So we're asking people in this effort to let's go together, because we do believe from the work that we've been doing that there's high value on both sides. So capturing data is really about the back end of it, right? It's really about trying to understand to what extent the badges are helpful for a hiring manager who, if you read the reports, constantly complaining about college graduates not having the skills and not being able to see those in the resumes that they're getting for these entry-level positions. So we're saying we believe if we come together and try and solve this, then we can work carefully to understand, right, at what point did that badge provide you know, some added value for you as a hiring manager? How do we make it show as early as possible? You know, all those types of critical questions. So most of the data that we're seeking to collect are going to be questions that we have for the employers. Now, from a student perspective, we are interested in speaking to students about where they're going to apply. So we're interested in collecting their outcomes as it relates to employment, which is why that's one of the questions already on the application. We're interested to know if schools that are applying our programs are already doing this sort of work. So what are their outcomes? Where are they applying? And how are they utilizing the credential? We're also interested in you know, their own experience. So what was it like earning these credentials? What was it like going through this process? So those are the type of data that we're seeking to collect from both sides. I would say that more of it is going to be on the employer side than the student side. There will be some there. And in relation to FERPA, you know, there will be surveys, there'll be interviews. I think that we will be working with you. So we're not necessarily dictating we must and this is how it's going to be, but anybody who's participating, we're going to work with you around making sure that all this is compliant, right? We all understand what FERPA is and the challenges around that. So we're seeking to avoid that, and we will have some forms. We have some standard forms that we use now with students who do participate in pilots with us. Some of those are for visual, like if we're taking pictures of a session or we want to interview them and use the video as a clip. So we've got lots of different forms that we'll bring to the table. We'll work with you to make sure that everybody is feeling protected in the use of the data. So this is a great one, like mostly because I think the answer is so cool, right? Which is that there are no costs associated with participating. You know, this is so important to us, and we believe so important to the field that we are going to, the lab is funding this first piece of work. And if you're not familiar with the lab's work beyond the toolkit, I encourage you to look at the other work that we do on our website, because you'll sort of see the breadth and scope of the work that we do. So we have very detailed processes and design work that we do. We're bringing that work to the table at no cost to participating institutions. So you're not paying us for anything when you do sign on. There'll be a statement of work, but there will be no dollars changing hands there. You don't have to pay for us to put boots on the ground on your campus. We are going to fund that. So that's the exciting piece of this. I'll also add that our partner in this, Credly Acclaim, who's providing the digital badging platform, is also allowing participating institutions to use their premier services at no cost for 3 years. So this is super exciting. We're thankful to those folks over at Credly for working with us on this and providing the asset so we can all learn and build a better pipeline and pathway for learners.
So this is another question that we get a lot in regard to the employers. How do we get them on board, and how do we show them the value of digital credentials? Because it is a lot of times in various HR circles still very new. So one of the roles that the lab plays is an advocacy role. So we're trying to be in the mix at a lot of HR conferences, and we're trying to find the circles, the thought leaders in this area as well. So as part of that, we've created an employer advisory committee where we have some senior level HR executives that are sort of our ears on the ground, learning and telling us what they're learning about the trends, what we should be on the lookout for, and we also use them to pressure test various strategies or communication talking points. So if you are still trying to work with your employer to get them on board, we have talking points, flyers, things like these that we can share with you that we've used with employers in the past. So we're happy to share those, and especially once we start working together, we'll share all of our assets that we have for employers.
And can I just add that, you know, this is probably a question that we field more than any other question out there, because we've been doing this work now for 3+ years on the value of digital credentials. It's still nascent, right? It's still early days. So that's part of the reason we need to do this. So yeah, we're adept at having these conversations. We're happy to participate in those conversations if you need to bring employer partners on to help you want them to hear it directly from us. So there's a lot of ways that we can work with you on this.
And finally, another question that we got was, how do we plan to scale the faculty assessment? So this is another frequently asked question, because a lot of times it is one faculty member or one associate dean, whoever it is that's championing this movement on their campus. And it can be a lot of work, both time consuming, to issue all the badges, go through and grade all the assessments, be the facilitator in this process. So we're, at the lab, we're very open to experimentation and iteration. So we're open to new models. If there's something that you're willing to try, some things that have worked in the past are peer assessments. So having others in the cohort, this is another way to build skills and giving feedback, which is important in the 21st century. To keep students in the loop who have already gone through the badge earning process, we've thought of having badged students come back and be the ones assessing. There could potentially be a cohort of faculty members that are all trained so that it can be dispersed throughout a department to do the assessment, but we're definitely willing, this is sort of up to the issuing body, since you guys are going to be the one issuing the badges, sort of your comfort level with who is doing the assessing. So that is all of the questions that we have sort of fielded so far. You can find these and others related strictly to the badges on the facilitator's guide of the digital badging toolkit that we've released on the lab's website. And now for you guys that are on the line with us, we'd be happy to take, if you guys have additional questions or if you want to go a little deeper into something that we mentioned so far, you can either unmute yourselves and talk to us, or you can chat in the text box, whatever works for you guys.
Hi, would it be okay to ask a question now?
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
Hi, this is Christiana Riley from the University of Minnesota. So we have a couple of initiatives at the U. One of them is in my unit, and we are tracking 21st century skills. And for the first time, we've been able to create analytics in Canvas so that we actually have the learning management system track the competencies so that we can do reports on which courses are tracking which competency. And then we have CLA work on what's called the core career competencies, and they all align to the University of Minnesota student learning outcomes. The part, I think, that my biggest question to you is, you know, fostering these skills are like meta outcomes. You know, they're not like a course goal that you achieve at the end of a course. They need fostering through the educational journey. And so, in other words, they develop over time. For them to be badged, to say, you've got it, or you have done that, to be consistent, so that they mean something, so that the metadata means something in the world outside. How have you handled that the value assigned to a badge is consistent in some way? Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's all like teacher A might use it for an assignment and say, hey, great creativity in this, right? Or great teamwork in this. What does a badge mean? Because I think that that's the part I grapple with, because I'm very interested in participating. But for me, that's the biggest question, that when it becomes an external validation, it needs to be a standard, and I don't know what the standard is.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the way I'm going to answer this is in some ways may fly in the face of the way in which, you know, we're currently having this conversation, which part of it is beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So when you think about a credential, who should determine the value of that credential? And I think this is why digital badges are actually very relevant, is that, you know, perhaps in Tara's business, she's looking for a certain level of oral communication skills. In my business, I'm looking for a different level of oral communication skills. She might look at somebody and say, you know, that person is not good enough given the role that I have based on what I'm seeing from that learner. I might say, no, that person's skills are perfect for what I need them to do, right? So you've got student with the same credential showing it to two different people, and how is the value being placed on that credential is just by who's actually accessing the credential to be able to say, yes, I want that learner, or I don't want that learner. So the way that we're doing this work as part of the cohort is, and this is why we're doing this with employers, is to be able to understand from employers and help them do, in some ways, a little validation of, well, what do I want to see as an employer if I'm going to continue with oral communication? If that's one of the credentials that I've identified as I want to see this one for this role that I have, this entry-level position, then we're going to spread out on the table for those employers the different potential artifacts that could be shown to the employer, right? So, and for anybody who's not as familiar with digital badges, that's the clickability, right? The metadata to be able to get underneath that and see a 30-second elevator pitch, or to see a rubric, or to see a 360 assessment. These are tangible artifacts that right now employers are saying, I can't really get that from a BA or a BS degree. So we'll allow employers to essentially hand choose those, right? And this is part of the learning. So if employers are saying, I want these skills and these artifacts, then that essentially is the validation, right? If students are going to go back then and pitch to your pilot, this is the skill, these are the credentials, these are the artifacts, then we're doing what the employers are asking, right? And they are going to be the ones who are essentially saying, yes, this is valuable, right? So how are we being attentive and to the needs of employers? It's a different type of approach because it's a different type of credential. And I think that's why we have to be willing to explore ways to do this. And that's part of what we're doing here. We're not trying to suggest a certain way for this. And this is not just an issue that we have been grappling with around our badges, but I think that anybody who is doing badging right now as an assessment, as a tool or strategy, or anybody who's trying, as you are talking about, identifying the skills, there's this blurred space. Like, are we saying the same thing? In this case, oral communication is going to mean the same thing because we're talking about the same credential, but one employer might just say that's not what I want to see, and I guess that's okay.
Yeah, Don, I really like the idea of pairing the artifact with the badge, so that in many sense it is, here is the badge is like, the identity of the artifact, like the and then, but here you can see it, which means that like an e-portfolio or something. And this is kind of my other question is, so we have one program that is working on some, we're using Google Sites as kind of the purgatory of the portfolio, but that is, but then students could be putting their artifacts on LinkedIn. Have you had, in your experience working with other universities, had a workflow or an architecture that basically accommodates what is like using the learning management system to author it, using Credly to export it, it all lands on LinkedIn, and that's where the artifact is? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I like the idea of pairing the artifact with the badge, but where, who's, but you don't, the whole purgatory part is difficult because in the architecture, unless it is something that is, I think you need the purgatory because students are kind of still developing. And then when they are proud of something, they might themselves put that badge on LinkedIn because they're proud of it and they want to externally show it. So the part I'm grappling with is the awarding internally to say you did a great job versus an external display to the world, meaning I'll show you something and here I'll show you the artifact with it. Could you speak to that, like where that lives, or have you had any like elegant solutions for that?
Sure. So, well, currently, and I'm just going to speak to Credly since they're the platform that we're going to be using here. the badges will be hosted on Credly. Therefore, learners for the rest of their time will always have the ability to link to that, whether they want to put that on LinkedIn or they just want to put that on their applying to grad school and they put it on a grad school application or whatever it might be, right? Or show an employer when they're in the workplace. Actually, they will always have the portability of that and be able to access what is beneath beneath the badge itself, the metadata. This is one of those, you're asking a tough question around this idea of, do I feel like it's good enough to show, the world essentially, right? And, and that's part of this study in some ways is a friendly way to explore this. And we continually push anybody who's working with us around this idea of getting artifacts out there, right? Because this is what hiring managers saying. And just last week I had a conversation with a hiring manager who said, for an entry-level person, college grad, I need as much data as I can get because I don't have, this large body of work to draw from. So if I can see something like that, that's so helpful to me, right? So we're responding to those needs. And a lot of this will come out as part of these design sessions that Tara's talking about that we'll be running. So we're going to come up with what we feel is an elegant solution that will include the use of Credly, the use of your current LMS system, so whatever you currently have, ways that we can leverage that. We're not saying you must do it this way. We're going to work with any participating institution to see, well, what are you using currently? What can we leverage that for? How can we also use Credly, to show the badge and have it out there for the learner so that it's portable? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, like you mentioned, a Google site or some sort of other online e-portfolio. You could attach that as evidence to the badge. So if they had something, if it was the oral communication badge and they uploaded their elevator pitch, which is one of the artifacts for that badge, to their e-portfolio, then that link could be submitted as part of evidence. So when they go on Credly and they're looking at the badge, they could see it hosted on their e-portfolio. And that way the link stays the same, but they can go in and update it over time as they become more proficient, or maybe their elevator pitch changes or whatnot.
Any other questions that folks may have? The toolkit real quick. I'm going to close with that. I think if there are folks who are viewing this, and if you would like to submit questions to us, you can do that. We're certainly. Someone's going to say something.
Oh, I was just saying, we work with advisory boards in terms of moving our disciplinary programs kind of into a competency-based model, and not like a purely CBE model in the sense that we are doing self-paced learning, but more so that we are tracking those skills. We are basically identifying. We used to have program level outcomes, which were large umbrella statements. And so now we are unpacking those large umbrella statements into individual competencies. And in many ways, they really have a nice relationship to the 21st century badges or skills. And rather than working with employers, would you be interested in working with advisory boards? Because that's kind of like there are multiple employers coming together to say, these are the skills that we want.
Advisory board could certainly participate, but at the end of the day, because we do want to be able to test the badge as a mechanism in the hiring process, then we would need to have somebody who would be on the receiving end of resumes, right, for students. So in the case of an advisory board, perhaps there's one that who's on the advisory board who would commit to that or more. But that's something that I wouldn't make that a sticking point, but at the end of the day, we do, those are critical data that we need to be able to get from this. So the advisory board are not going to be individuals who are either hiring managers or people who would be looking at a resume. Then we would need to have, those individuals somewhere in the sphere.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I have one more question.
Go for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I really like the idea that you started out with a resume that actually it looks T-shaped skills. I can almost see it as a graphic, kind of like, almost like this becomes I just really love that idea that you put out to put your skills up there that are kind of the 21st century skills, and then your expertise kind of. Have you ever thought about like doing almost like a resume template that we can give our graduates to use, basically, because they could, it's almost like we could, and then we could speak to our marketing department in terms of alumni relations, in terms of tracking particular cases, individual students. I don't know like what large data sets we get, but I think tracking individual students, I think would be really awesome. And asking students themselves.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and asking students themselves, like, would anybody like assistance with this? Or would anybody like to be part of this study? So that we basically have student volunteers to say, we do an internship, and maybe in that last course where they do their internship, and we could weave that into our internship course, so that basically it helps them. We also have another course that is basically getting ready. We have them make a LinkedIn profile. We have them create their Google site and create their e-portfolio. This could just become part of the getting ready to get hired, so to speak, a portion, and then ask students, do you want to be part of this study?
Sure. So two things, and I'll let Tara talk about this image in a second, but just to respond to this idea of leveraging existing programs, that's really what this is going to be about at the end of the day, right? Is how do we work this in, like the badge earning experience, into programs that could align with this? And this is what part of the boots on the ground from our end and the lift from the lab was stood up a number of pilots for students to actually earn these badges, providing our expertise to help you think about, well, where will this fit, right? And that may be, you gave an example of one type of program that this might be well suited for. So there's a lot of, these are all the things that would come out as part of the engagement. Like, where will we actually do this? And how will we use these tools? And maybe other ideas will emerge, right? But at the end of the day, what the lab always wants to do is, one, leave schools with capability and smarts to be able to carry this work forward in our absence. Two, leave you with a set of tools that can actually help you think about how to do this work better or differently. And that might be the T profile is one of those. And then finally, just, really just be able to have a theory of change, right? To have you think about, what does this mean for us as a learning institution more broadly, now that we did this learning together? So we know, having done this many times before, there's going to be a hell of a lot of learning that comes out of it for every participating institution, and for us as well, for learners, employers, et cetera. And a great story and some different examples of how it's been done, because everybody can take a different shot at this based upon your own resources, programs, put your own fingerprint on it. I'll let Tara talk about the image that's on the screen here.
Yeah, so just as you started remarking about the resume and seeing how you could visualize it as a T, this is actually an exercise that we do with students who have earned the badge. We give them a blank T, and then oftentimes they'll have their resume printed out right next to it, and then they'll port over the skills, whether it's from a class or their job or something in the co-curricular space like earning a badge. and start to shade in the skills that they believe they have, and then write in the technical skills. And then on the other side, in this picture, we also have an employer. So this is Amy, who works at a children's hospital, and she filled in her T profile for her job, and then Sydney, who is an aspiring nurse, filled in hers. So then it sort of becomes a roadmap for Sydney, who wants to become a nurse, so that she can see, these are the skills that I have, these are the skills that I need to have to get here one day, so she knows where to focus her efforts.
And this paper version was like a V1 prototype for us. Since then, Tara and we've been working on a clickable electronic version, and we have ideas about this as almost a heat map and an interactive dashboard down the road for learners. So lots of ideas around the utility of the T. We've seen it already, and we're excited to make it kind of the cornerstone of this particular body of work for the lab.
And would you share your template, Don? The one that is that T-shaped, just the document that's being held up on the website there? Do you have a template?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Sure, we'll send that out. Great. Well, we will close it here. I want to remind people to get your applications in as soon as possible if you want to do this work with us. A lot of people are paying attention to this. As if you aren't aware, there was an article in the Chronicle last week talking about this work, so it is being tracked. It's a lot of great press coming around this, and a lot of tremendous learning. So we're excited to get going with our partners, and looking forward to seeing a few more applications come in, and then kicking off this work in this upcoming academic year. So thank you for your time, your interest, and as I mentioned before, feel free if you want to send us questions because you weren't on this live, things come up, please don't hesitate. The contact information is in the application itself, so you can send us an email and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Anything else to add?
Thanks for joining.
Or
for listening, if you're listening to this after the fact.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Don, can I ask just one last question? And that is, I did a quick submission of an application. Can I edit it? Or can I just shut it? Because I think that I just did it kind of a little bit in a rush.
Okay. Yeah, I would say if you want to kind of like resubmit, we will, we'll make sure that we're paying attention to the second one that came in.
Okay, sounds good. That's what I'll do then. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.